Short Stories. The Tale of Melon City. The ruler of a certain city one day decided that he would like a triumphal arch built, so that he could ride under it with all pomp, for the desirable edification of the multitude. But when the great moment came, his crown was knocked off. The arch had been built too low. The ruler therefore ordained, in his rightful wrath, that the chief of the builders should be hanged. Gallows were prepared, but, as he was being taken to the place of execution, the master builder called out that it was all the fault of the workmen, who had done the actual construction job. The king, with his customary sense of justice, called the workers to account. But they escaped the charge by explaining the masons said that they had only carried out the orders of the architect. He, in turn, reminded the king that his majesty had, at the last moment, made some amendments of his own to the plans, changing them. "Summon the wisest man in the country," said the ruler, "for this is undoubtedly a difficult problem, and we need counsel." The wisest man was carried in, unable to stand on his own feet, so ancient, and therefore so wise, was he.
"It is evident," he quavered, "that in law the actual culprit must be punished, and that is, in this case, quite evidently, none other than the arch itself."
Applauding his decision, the king ordered that the offending arch be carried to the scaffold. But as it was being taken there, one of the royal councillors pointed out that this arch was something which had actually touched the august head of the monarch, and must surely never be disgraced by the rope of execution. As in the meantime, exhausted by his exertions, the venerable wise man had breathed his last, the people were unable to apply to him for an interpretation of this new observation. The doctors of law, however, decreed that the lower part of the arch, which had not touched anything at all, could be hanged for the crime of the whole arch. But when the executioner tried to put the arch into the noose, he found that the rope was too short. The rope-maker was called, but he soon explained that in his opinion it was the scaffold that was too high. He suggested that the carpenters were at fault. "The crowd is getting impatient," said the king, "and we must therefore quickly find someone to hang. We can postpone the consideration of finer points like guilt until a later, more convenient occasion." In a surprisingly short time, all the people in the city had been carefully measured, but only one was found to be tall enough to fit the gallows. It was the king himself. Such was the popular enthusiasm at the discovery of a man who would fit, that the king had to conform, and he was hanged.
"Thank goodness we found someone," said the Prime Minister, "for if we had not satisfied the appetite of the mob, they would undoubtedly have turned against the crown."
But there were important matters to consider, for almost at once it was realized that the king was dead. "In conformity with custom," announced the heralds in the streets, "the first man who passes the city gate shall decide who is to be our next great ruler." The very next man to wander past the gate was an idiot. He was quite unlike the ordinary, sensible citizens with whom we have become familiar, and when he was asked who should be king, immediately said, "A melon." This was because he always said "a melon" to every question. In fact, he thought about nothing else, being very fond of melons. And thus it came about that a melon was, with due ceremony, crowned. Now that was years and years ago. Nowadays, when people ask the inhabitants of that land why their king seems to be a melon, they say, "Oh, because of customary choice. His Majesty evidently desires to be a melon. Certainly we shall allow him to remain one until his further pleasure be known. He has, in our country, every right to be what he wants to be. We are content with that, so long as he doesn't interfere in our lives. Haughty and Generous. A certain rich man named Khalil was famed far and wide for his ability to maintain, at one and the same time, the two characteristics of hauteur and generosity, which are held by many people to produce the ideal nature. He had a friend called Aziz, a rich merchant, whose affairs came to grief through some disastrous commercial transaction. Aziz called his son Ali and said to him, "My son, go to the haughty and generous Khalil. Tell him that your father has sent you. Ask him to loan me a camel-load of silver, if you will be so generous, which I shall repay with profit to him when my affairs are once again in order." Ali set off for the house of Khalil. When he arrived there, he was shown into the audience hall, where Khalil was sitting. He was so haughty that he would hardly look upon the youth, and sat with his face averted from the company. It was only after several hours that Ali was able to make his request. Khalil looked at him with the utmost hauteur, and said, "Leave my presence immediately." As the wretched Ali was making his way back through the courtyard of the house, he was handed the leading rein of a long string of camels, each one loaded with as many sacks of gold and jewels and robes of honour as it could carry. Aziz was overjoyed when Ali returned with the treasures, and after many months of trading he amassed a huge profit. He said to Ali, "My son, here is a caravan with double the amount of wealth which Khalil so generously, albeit haughtily, lent us. Hasten and deliver it to him with the gratitude of your father." Ali made his way again to Khalil's house, this time gaining admission only after waiting for several days. When at last he was allowed to speak to Khalil, who was sitting in the same manner as if he had never moved, he said, "Noble sir, I am Ali, son of Aziz, come with my father's thanks and greetings, to return, together with a legitimate profit, the amount of money which you had in your generosity lent to a beggar without any security." Khalil looked at him for a long time. Then he said, "Ali, son of Aziz, you and your father, though impressed, cannot understand the nature and extent of my chief characteristics. Get out of here, with your money and your camels and your goods. Generosity is not lending. I am not your father's banker." If you regret kissing me, take back your kiss. Proverb. May your shadow never grow less. Proverb. The chests of gold. Once upon a time, there was a rich merchant who went away on a long journey, leaving his steward in charge of his money. A crafty and dishonest man overheard him say to the steward, "You are in sole charge. I have in my strong room 100 chests of gold. In each chest there are 100 gold pieces. Guard them well until I return." The crafty man scraped up an acquaintanceship with the steward, and they often used to sit drinking coffee together. One day the crafty man said, "I am something of an alchemist. If I can get 1 gold piece, I can double it so that it becomes 2. At first the steward did not believe him, but after a time he was tempted to make a test, using some of his employer's money. "You only borrow it," said the crafty man, "and you keep it in your own hands, here in the coffee house. If it does not multiply, what can you lose?" Eventually the steward agreed. He took one piece from his master's hoard and put it in a cunningly contrived box which the alchemist supplied. When they opened the lid, there were 2 pieces inside. Thus encouraged, and being presented with the extra piece as a gift, the steward asked the alchemist if he could repeat the process.
"Certainly," said the crafty man, "but there are certain rules. First, you must take only 1 coin from each box of coins that you have, however many that may be. Bring them here."
The steward did as he was told, and one by one, the 100 coins became 200.
"And now for the next rule," said the crafty man. "And that is, you must not replace doubled coins in the same box. Get another box and put the 200 in that. Then spend from the new box until your own 100 are finished. This will leave your master's capital untouched, and you will have gained 100 pieces of gold."
The steward did as he was told. He started to spend his own share, and sure enough, he found that the doubled pieces were real gold, accepted without question in the shops. He had never had so much money in his life, and he spent a lot of it on drink and other personal indulgences, encouraged by the alchemist, who told him,
"As soon as that 100 is finished, tell me, and we will be able to repeat the process, but not before."
When the time came for the merchant's return, the steward was well addicted to drink. The merchant, when he saw him, said, "What kind of steward are you? I suppose that you have spent my money on yourself." "On the contrary," mumbled the steward, "I have multiplied it." The merchant ran to his hoard, but there did not seem to be anything missing so far as he could see. At that moment the crafty man appeared on the scene and said to the merchant,
"Give me the money that you have been keeping for me."
"What money?" said the merchant. "I have never seen you before in my life." Such an argument started that the police were called, and they carried the pair to the court of summary judgment.
"This man has my money which he was keeping for me," said the thief to the judge.
"How much do you say it is?" said the judge.
9,950 gold pieces, 99 to a chest, 1 chest with only 50 pieces in it," said the crafty man,
who had been keeping count of what the steward spent. "That is a lie, and I can prove it," said the merchant. "I had 100 boxes with 100 pieces in each, which I left with my steward. There is either that amount left, which is 10,000 gold pieces in all, or something less than that if the steward has been robbing me. There cannot be the number that this man says." An order was made by the court to inspect the gold. It was found to tally exactly with the thief's story. The steward was regarded as bereft of his reason by alcoholism and could not be admitted as a witness. The court awarded the whole of the money to the crafty man, who became a popular and respected citizen. The lowliest of the Arabs. The Caliph Harun al-Rashid was of the Prophet's tribe, but not being descended from him, was considered to be lower in rank than the Sa'ids of the Hashemite clan. But he was, after all, an emperor, and when he heard that a certain Sa'id was being hailed by his followers as noblest of all the Arabs, he called the man before him. "O Sa'id," said the Caliph, "I am junior in descent to you, since you are of the blood of the Holy Prophet. But have you not heard that the messenger formally abolished all title to nobility based upon blood?" "In that case," said the Sa'id, "I am still the noblest of all the Arabs." "How can that be?" asked the Caliph. "Even the lowliest of the Arabs, once brought into the presence of such a king, must consider this honour to elevate him to the rank of noblest of the Arabs, said the Sayyid. Now that it is gone, does it matter whether a cow ate it or not? Proverb. The Man, the Snake, and the Stone. One day, a man who had not a care in the world was walking along a road. An unusual object to one side of him caught his eye. "I must find out what this is," he said to himself. As he came up to it, he saw that it was a large, very flat stone. "I must find out what is underneath this," he told himself, and he lifted the stone. No sooner had he done so than he heard a loud, hissing sound, and a huge snake came gliding out from a hole under the stone. The man dropped the stone in alarm. The snake wound itself into a coil and said to him, "Now I am going to kill you, for I am a venomous snake." "But I have released you," said the man. "How can you repay good with evil? Such an action would not accord with reasonable behaviour."
"In the first place," said the snake, "you lifted the stone from curiosity and in ignorance of the possible consequences. How can this now suddenly become, 'I have released you'?"
"We must always try to return to reasonable behaviour when we stop to think," murmured the man.
"Return to it when you think invoking it might suit your interests," said the snake.
"Yes," said the man. "I was a fool to expect reasonable behaviour from a snake."
"From a snake, expect snake behaviour," said the snake. "To a snake, snake behaviour is what can be regarded as reasonable. Now I am going to kill you," it continued.
"Please, do not kill me," said the man. "Give me another chance. You have taught me about curiosity, reasonable behaviour, and snake behaviour. Now you would kill me before I can put this knowledge into action."
"Very well," said the snake. "I shall give you another chance. I shall come along with you on your journey. We will ask the next creature whom we meet, who shall be neither a man nor a snake, to adjudicate between us."
The man agreed, and they started on their way. Before long, they came to a flock of sheep in a field. The snake stopped, and the man cried to the sheep, "Sheep, sheep, please save me. This snake intends to kill me. If you tell him not to do so, he will spare me. Give a verdict in my favour, for I am a man, the friend of sheep." One of the sheep answered, "We have been put out into this field after serving a man for many years. We have given him wool year after year, and now that we are old, tomorrow he will kill us for mutton. That is the measure of the generosity of men. Snake, kill that man." The snake reared up, and his green eyes glittered as he said to the man, "This is how your friends see you. I shudder to think what your enemies are like." "Give me one more chance," cried the man in desperation. "Please let us find someone else to give an opinion so that my life may be spared."
"I do not want to be as unreasonable as you think I am," said the snake, "and I will therefore continue in accordance with your pattern and not with mine. Let us ask the next individual whom we may meet, being neither a man nor a snake, what your fate is to be."
The man thanked the snake, and they continued on their journey. Presently they came upon a lone horse, standing hobbled in a field. The snake addressed him,
"Horse, horse, why are you hobbled like that?"
The horse said, "For many years I served a man. He gave me food for which I had not asked, and he taught me to serve him. He said that this was in exchange for the food and stable. Now that I am too infirm to work, he has decided to sell me soon for horse meat. I am hobbled because the man thinks that if I roam over this field I will eat too much of his grass.
"Do not make this horse my judge, for God's sake!" exclaimed the man.
"According to our compact," said the snake inexorably, "this man and I have agreed to have our case judged by you."
He outlined the matter, and the horse said, "Snake, it is beyond my capabilities and not in my nature to kill a man. But I feel that you, as a snake, have no alternative but to do so if a man is in your power."
"If you will give me just one more chance," begged the man, "I am sure that something will come to my aid. I have been unlucky on this journey so far, and have only come across creatures who have a grudge. Let us therefore choose some animal which has no such knowledge, and hence no generalized animosity towards my kind."
"People do not know snakes," said the snake, "and yet they seem to have a generalized animosity towards them. But I am willing to give you just one more chance."
They continued their journey. Soon they saw a fox, lying asleep under a bush beside the road. The man woke the fox gently and said, "Fear nothing, brother fox. My case is such and such, and my future depends upon your decision. The snake will give me no further chance, so only your generosity or altruism can help me." The fox thought for a moment, and then he said, "I am not sure that only generosity or altruism can operate here, but I will engage myself in this matter. In order to come to a decision, I must rely upon something more than hearsay. We must demonstrate as well. Come, let us return to the beginning of your journey and examine the facts on the spot." They returned to where the first encounter had taken place. "Now we will reconstruct the situation," said the fox. "Snake, be so good as to take your place once more in your hole under that flat stone." The man lifted the stone, and the snake coiled itself up in the hollow beneath it. The man let the stone fall. The snake was now trapped again, and the fox, turning to the man, said, "We have returned to the beginning. The snake cannot get out unless you release him. He leaves our story at this point." Thank you," said the man, his eyes full of tears. "Thanks are not enough, brother," said the fox. "In addition to generosity and altruism, there is the matter of my payment." "How can you enforce payment?" asked the man. "Anyone who can solve the problem which I have just concluded," said the fox, "is well able to take care of such a detail as that. I again invite you to recompense me, from fear if not from any sense of justice. Shall we call it, in your words, being reasonable?" The man said, "Very well. Come to my house and I will give you a chicken." They went to the man's house. The man went into his chicken coop and came back in a moment with a bulging sack. The fox seized it and was about to open it when the man said, "Friend fox, do not open the sack here. I have human neighbors, and they should not know that I am cooperating with a fox. They might kill you as well as censuring me." "That is a reasonable thought," said the fox. "What do you suggest I do?" "Do you see that clump of trees yonder?" said the man, pointing. "Yes," said the fox. "You run with the sack into that cover, and you will be able to enjoy your meal unmolested." The fox ran off. As soon as he reached the trees, a party of hunters, whom the man knew would be there, caught him. He leaves our story here. And the man? His future is yet to come. A drum is not beaten under a coverlet. Proverb. The value of kingdoms. King Bayezid was brought from the battlefield and taken before the victorious Tamerlane the Conqueror, Timur the Lame. As soon as he saw that Bayezid had only one eye, Timur started to laugh uncontrollably. Bayezid addressed him, "You may laugh at my defeat, but you would do better to reflect that you might have been here in my place. God it is who presides over the destiny of thrones. Man should not laugh at the manifestations of his will." Timur, when he recovered himself, answered, "It is that very same thought which does make me laugh. God indeed presides over thrones, but they are of such little importance to him, it seems, that he hands over the kingdom of a one-eyed man to a one-legged one." A cart is the word for something which moves. Proverb. The Magic Horse. This tale is of great importance because it belongs to an instructional corpus of mystical materials with inner content, but, beyond entertainment value, without immediate external significance. The teaching story was brought to perfection as a communication instrument many thousands of years ago. The fact that it has not developed greatly since then has caused people obsessed by some theories of our current civilizations to regard it as the product of a less enlightened time. They feel that it must surely be little more than a literary curiosity, something fit for children, the projection, perhaps, of infantile desires, a means of enacting a wish fulfillment. Hardly anything could be further from the truth than such pseudo-philosophical, certainly unscientific imaginings. Many teaching stories are entertaining to children and to naive peasants. Many of them, in the forms in which they are viewed by conditioned theorists, have been so processed by unregenerate amateurs that their effective content is distorted. Some apply only to certain communities, depending upon special circumstances for their correct unfolding, circumstances whose absence effectively prevents the action of which they are capable. So little is known to the academics, the scholars, and the intellectuals of this world about these materials, that there is no word in modern languages which has been set aside to describe them. But the teaching story exists nevertheless. It is part of the most priceless heritage of mankind. Real teaching stories are not to be confused with parables, which are adequate enough in their intention, but still on a lower level of material, generally confined to the inculcation of moralistic principles, not the assistance of interior movement of the human mind. What we often take on the lower level of parable, however, can sometimes be seen by real specialists as teaching stories, especially when experienced under correct conditions. Unlike the parable, the meaning of the teaching story cannot be unravelled by ordinary intellectual methods alone. Its action is direct and certain, upon the innermost part of the human being, an action incapable of manifestation by means of the emotional or intellectual apparatus. The closest that we can come to describing its effect is to say that it connects with a part of the individual which cannot be reached by any other convention, and that it establishes in him or in her a means of communication with a non-verbalized truth beyond the customary limitations of our familiar dimensions. Some teaching stories cannot now be reclaimed because of the literary and traditionalistic, even ideological processing to which they have been subjected. The worst of such processes is the historicizing one, where a community comes to believe that one of their former teaching stories represents literal, historical truth. This tale is given here in a form which is innocent of this and other kinds of maltreatment. Once upon a time, not so very long ago, there was a realm in which the people were exceedingly prosperous. All kinds of discoveries had been made by them in the growing of plants, in harvesting and preserving fruits, and in making objects for sale to other countries, and in many other practical arts. Their ruler was unusually enlightened, and he encouraged new discoveries and activities, because he knew of their advantages for his people. He had a son named Haughty, who was an expert in using strange contrivances, and another, called Tambal, a dreamer, who seemed interested only in things which were of little value in the eyes of the citizens. From time to time the king, who was named King Mumkin, circulated announcements to this effect: "Let all those who have notable devices and useful artifacts present them to the palace for examination, so that they may be appropriately rewarded." Now there were 2 men of that country, an ironsmith and a woodworker, who were great rivals in most things, and each delighted in making strange contraptions. When they heard this announcement one day, they agreed to compete for an award, so that their relative merits could be decided once and for all by their sovereign and publicly recognized. Accordingly, the smith worked day and night on a mighty engine, employing a multitude of talented specialists, and surrounding his workshop with high walls, so that his devices and methods should not become known. At the same time, the woodworker took his simple tools and went into a forest where, after long and solitary reflection, he prepared his own masterpiece. News of the rivalry spread, and people thought that the smith must easily win, for his cunning works had been seen before, and while the woodworker's products were generally admired, they were only of occasional and undramatic use. When both were ready, the king received them in open court. The smith produced an immense metallic fish, which could, he said, swim in and under the water. It could carry large quantities of freight over the land. It could burrow into the earth, and it could even fly slowly through the air. At first the court found it hard to believe that there could be such a wonder made by man, but when the smith and his assistants demonstrated it, the king was overjoyed, and declared the smith amongst the most honoured in the land, with a special rank and title of benefactor of the community. Prince Haughty was placed in charge of the making of the wondrous fishes, and the services of this new device became available to all mankind. Everyone blessed the smith and Haughty, as well as the benign and sagacious monarch whom they loved so much. In the excitement, the self-effacing carpenter had been all but forgotten. Then one day someone said, "But what about the contest? Where is the entry of the woodworker? We all know him to be an ingenious man. Perhaps he has produced something useful."
"How could anything possibly be as useful as the wondrous fishes?" asked Haughty, and many of the courtiers and the people agreed with him. But one day the king was bored. He had become accustomed to the novelty of the fishes and the reports of the wonders which they so regularly performed. He said, "Call the woodcarver, for I would now like to see what he has made." The simple woodcarver came into the throne room, carrying a parcel wrapped in coarse cloth. As the whole court craned forward to see what he had, he took off the covering to reveal a wooden horse. It was well enough carved, and it had some intricate patterning chiselled into it, as well as being decorated with coloured paints, but it was only "A mere plaything," snapped the king.
"But, father," said Prince Tambal, "let us ask the man what it is for."
"Very well," said the king. "What is it for?"
"Your Majesty," stammered the woodcarver, It is a magic horse. It does not look impressive, but it has, as it were, its own inner senses. Unlike the fish, which has to be directed, this horse can interpret the desires of the rider and carry him wherever he needs to go."
"Such a stupidity is fit only for Tambal," murmured the chief minister at the king's elbow. "It cannot have any real advantage when measured against the wondrous fish."
The woodcarver was preparing sadly to depart when Tambal said, "Father, let me have the wooden horse."
"All right," said the king. "Give it to him. Take the woodcarver away and tie him on a tree somewhere, so that he will realize that our time is valuable. Let him contemplate the prosperity which the wondrous fish has brought us. And perhaps after some time we shall let him go free, to practice whatever he may have learnt of real industriousness through true reflection."
The woodcarver was taken away, and Prince Tambal left the court carrying the magic horse. Tambal took the horse to his quarters, where he discovered that it had several knobs, cunningly concealed in the carved designs. When these were turned in a certain manner, the horse, together with anyone mounted on it, rose into the air and sped to whatever place was in the mind of the person who moved the knobs. In this way, day after day, Tambal flew to places which he had never visited before. By this process he came to know a great many things. He took the horse everywhere with him. One day he met Hoshiyar, who said to him, "Carrying a wooden horse is a fit occupation for such as you. As for me, I am working for the good of all, towards my heart's desire."
Tambal thought, "I wish I knew what was the good of all, and I wish I could know what my heart's desire is." When he was next in his room, he sat upon the horse and thought, "I would like to know my heart's desire." At the same time, he moved some of the knobs on the horse's neck. Swifter than light the horse rose into the air and carried the prince 1,000 days' ordinary journey away to a far kingdom, ruled by a magician king. The king, whose name was Kahana, had a beautiful daughter called Precious Pearl, Durikarima. In order to protect her, he had imprisoned her in a circling palace which wheeled in the sky higher than any mortal could reach. As he was approaching the magic land, Tambal saw the glittering palace in the heavens and alighted there. The princess and the young horseman met and fell in love. "My father will never allow us to marry," she said, "for he had ordained that I become the wife of the son of another magician king who lives across the cold desert to the east of our homeland. He has vowed that when I am old enough, I shall cement the unity of the two kingdoms by this marriage. His will has never been successfully opposed." "I will go and try and reason with him," answered Tambal, as he mounted the magic horse again. But when he descended into the magic land, there were so many new and exciting things to see that he did not hurry to the palace. When at length he approached it, the drum at the gate indicating the absence of the king was already beating. "He has gone to visit his daughter in the whirling palace," said a passer-by when Tambal asked him when the king might be back, "and he usually spends several hours at a time with her." Tambal went to a quiet place, where he willed the horse to carry him to the king's own apartment. "I will approach him at his own home," he thought to himself, "for if I go to the whirling palace without his permission, he may be angry." He hid behind some curtains in the palace when he got there, and lay down to sleep. Meanwhile, unable to keep her secret, the Princess Precious Pearl had confessed to her father that she had been visited by a man on a flying horse,
and that he wanted to marry her. Kahana was furious. He placed sentries around the whirling palace, and returned to his own apartment to think things over. As soon as he entered his bedchamber, one of the tongueless magic servants guarding it pointed to the wooden horse lying in a corner. "Aha!" exclaimed the magician king. "Now I have him. Let us look at this horse and see what manner of thing it may be." As he and his servants were examining the horse, the prince managed to slip away and conceal himself in another part of the palace. After twisting the knobs, tapping the horse, and generally trying to understand how it worked, the king was baffled. "Take that thing away. It has no virtue now, even if it ever had any," he said. "It is just a trifle, fit for children." The horse was put into a store cupboard. Now King Kahana thought that he should make arrangements for his daughter's wedding without delay, in case the fugitive might have other powers or devices with which to try to win her. So he called her to his own palace and sent a message to the other magician king, asking that the prince who was to marry her be sent to claim his bride. Meanwhile, Prince Tambal, escaping from the palace by night when some guards were asleep, decided that he must try to return to his own country. His quest for his heart's desire now seemed almost hopeless. "If it takes me the rest of my life," he said to himself, "I shall come back here, bringing troops to take this kingdom by force. I can only do that by convincing my father that I must have his help to attain my heart's desire." So saying, he set off. Never was a man worse equipped for such a journey. An alien, travelling on foot, without any kind of provisions, facing pitiless heat and freezing nights interspersed with sandstorms. He soon became hopelessly lost in the desert. Now, in his delirium, Tambal started to blame himself, his father, the magician king, the woodcarver, even the princess and the magic horse itself. Sometimes he thought he saw water ahead of him, sometimes fair cities. Sometimes he felt elated, sometimes incomparably sad. Sometimes he even thought he had companions in his difficulties, but when he shook himself he saw that he was quite alone. He seemed to have been travelling for an eternity. Suddenly, when he had given up and started again several times, he saw something directly in front of him. It looked like a mirage, a garden full of delicious fruits, sparkling and almost, as it were, beckoning him towards them. Tambal did not at first take much notice of this, but soon, as he walked, he saw that he was indeed passing through such a garden. He gathered some of the fruits and tasted them cautiously. They were delicious. They took away his fear as well as his hunger and thirst. When he was full, he lay down in the shade of a huge and welcoming tree and fell asleep. When he woke up, he felt well enough, but something seemed to be wrong. Running to a nearby pool, he looked at his reflection in the water. Staring up at him was a horrible apparition. It had a long beard, curved horns, ears a foot long. He looked down at his hands. They were covered with fur. Was it a nightmare? He tried to wake himself, but all the pinching and pummeling had no effect. Now, almost bereft of his senses, beside himself with fear and horror, thrown into transports of screaming, racked with sobs, he threw himself on the ground. "Whether I live or die," he thought, "these accursed fruits have finally ruined me. Even with the greatest army of all time, conquest will not help me. Nobody would marry me now, much less the Princess Precious Pearl. And I cannot imagine the beast who would not be terrified at the sight of me, let alone my heart's desire." And he lost consciousness. When he woke again, it was dark, and a light was approaching through the groves of silent trees. Fear and hope struggled in him. As it came closer, he saw that the light was from a lamp enclosed in a brilliant star-like shape, and it was carried by a bearded man, who walked in the pool of brightness which it cast around. The man saw him. "My son," he said, "you have been affected by the influences of this place. If I had not come past, you would have remained just another beast of this enchanted grove, for there are many more like you. But I can help you." Tambal wondered whether this man was a fiend in disguise, perhaps the very owner of the evil trees. But as his sense came back, he realized that he had nothing to lose. "Help me, father," he said to the sage. "If you really want your heart's desire," said the other man, "you have only to fix this desire firmly in your mind, not thinking of the fruit. Then you have to take up some of the dried fruits, not the fresh, delicious ones, lying at the foot of all these trees, and eat them. Then follow your destiny." So saying, he walked away. While the sage's light disappeared into the darkness, Tambal saw that the moon was rising, and in its rays he could see that there were indeed piles of dried fruits under every tree. He gathered some and ate them as quickly as he could. Slowly, as he watched, the fur disappeared from his hands and arms. The horns first shrank, then vanished. The beard fell away. He was himself again. By now it was first light, and in the dawn he heard the tinkling of camel bells. A procession was coming through the enchanted forest. It was undoubtedly the cavalcade of some important personage on a long journey. As Tambal stood there, two outriders detached themselves from the glittering escort and galloped up to him. "In the name of the prince, our lord, we demand some of your fruit. His Celestial Highness is thirsty, and has indicated a desire for some of these strange apricots," said an officer. Still Tambal did not move, such was his numbed condition after his recent experiences. Now the prince himself came down from his palanquin and said, "I am Jadagazada, son of the magician king of the East. Here is a bag of gold, oaf. I am having some of your fruit because I am desirous of it. I am in a hurry, hastening to claim my bride, Princess Precious Pearl, daughter of Kahana, magician king of the West." At these words Tambal's heart turned over, but, realizing that this must be his destiny which the sage had told him to follow, he offered the prince as much of the fruit as he could eat. When he had eaten, the prince began to fall asleep. As he did so, horns, fur, and huge ears started to grow out of him. The soldiers shook him, and the prince began to behave in a strange way. He claimed that he was normal, and that they were deformed. The councillors who accompanied the party restrained the prince and held a hurried debate. Tambal claimed that all would have been well if the prince had not fallen asleep. Eventually it was decided to put Tambal in the palanquin to play the part of the prince. The horned Jadagazada was tied to a horse with a veil thrown over his face, disguised as a serving woman. "He may recover his wits eventually," said the councillors, "and in any case he is still our prince. Tambal shall marry the girl. Then, as soon as possible, we shall carry them all back to our own country for the king to unravel the problem." Tambal, biding his time and following his destiny, agreed to his own part in the masquerade. When the party arrived at the capital of the West, the king himself came out to meet them. Tambal was taken to the princess as her bridegroom, and she was so astonished that she nearly fainted. But Tambal managed to whisper to her rapidly what had happened, and they were duly married, amid great jubilations. In the meantime, the horned prince had half recovered his wits, but not his human form, and his escort still kept him under cover. As soon as the feasting was over, the chief of the horned prince's party, who had been keeping Tambal and the princess under a very close watch, presented himself to the court. He said, "O just and glorious monarch, fountain of wisdom, the time has now come, according to the pronouncements of our astrologers and soothsayers, to conduct the bridal pair back to our own land, so that they may be established in their new home under the most felicitous circumstances and influences." The princess turned to Tambal in alarm, for she knew that Jadagazada would claim her as soon as they were on the open road, and make an end of Tambal into the bargain. Tambal whispered to her, "Fear nothing. We must act as best we can, following our destiny. Agree to go, making only the condition that you will not travel without the wooden horse." At first, the magician king was annoyed at this foible of his daughter's. He realized that she wanted the horse because it was connected with her first suitor. But the chief minister of the horned prince said, "Majesty, I cannot see that this is anything worse than a whim for a toy, such as any young girl might have. I hope that you will allow her to have her plaything, so that we may make haste homeward." So the magician king agreed, and soon the cavalcade was resplendently on its way. After the king's escort had withdrawn, and before the time of the first night halt, the hideous Jadagazada threw off his veil and cried out to Tambal,
"Miserable author of my misfortunes! I now intend to bind you hand and foot to take you captive back to my own land. If, when we arrive there, you do not tell me how to remove this enchantment, I will have you flayed alive inch by inch. Now, give me the princess' precious pearl."
Tambal ran to the princess and, in front of the astonished party, rose into the sky on the wooden horse, with Precious Pearl mounted behind him. Within a matter of minutes the couple alighted at the palace of King Mumkin. They related everything that had happened to them, and the king was almost overcome with delight at their safe return. He at once gave orders for the hapless woodcarver to be released, recompensed and applauded by the entire populace. When the king was gathered to his fathers, Princess Precious Pearl and Prince Tambal succeeded him. Prince Hoshiar was quite pleased, too, because he was still entranced by the wondrous fish.
"I am glad for your own sakes if you are happy," he used to say to them, "but for my own part, nothing is more rewarding than concerning myself with the wondrous fish."
And this history is the origin of a strange saying current among the people of that land, yet whose beginnings have now been forgotten. The saying is, "Those who want fish can achieve much through fish, and those who do not know their heart's desire may first have to hear the story of the wooden horse."